Okay, so this video is going to be pretty much about different dynamic typing in Python, and then we're going to write a little program which demonstrates some type conversion and simple input and usage of the Python addition operator. So right now I'm just starting off in the interpreter. I've actually started up idle, but I'm in the interpreter. You can tell I'm in the idle because the prompt you see all the prompts up here for the file handling. But I'm in the interpreter, which we know because we see the 3 arrow prompts. So right now I'm just responding to the interpreter. And let's just start off here. Remember, the interpreter is something that you can use to test out different statements, see how they behave, and just check some stuff out. But typically when you're writing a larger program, you don't use the interpreter, you put your program in a file. So I'm starting out, I want to just kind of talk about different data types in Python right now. So the statement I'm going to type in right now is going to be a statement which creates a variable, okay, and assigns a value to a variable. Okay, so let's see. So this statement is going to be something really simple. A is assigned 5. Now when I type something like this, right away I've created a variable named A. Now what a variable is, it's a memory location, okay, that has a name associated with it. So you can then use that name whenever you want to work with the value that is stored in that memory location. So here I'm putting a 5 in a memory location that is named A. So then later on, when I go on to use the variable name A, I'm working with the value 5 that is stored in it. Okay, which I guess you probably read about in chapter 1 or are reading about in chapter 2 in more detail. Now the interpreter does have a memory, so even though nothing is output because I did not, or nothing's printed because I didn't write a statement that actually outputs anything, the interpreter remembers that I have this variable A, and it has, and this memory location does have the object 5 stored in it. Now there are different types of data, different types of values that you can store in Python. You can store whole numbers. You can work with whole numbers, like the 5, okay? And values that are whole numbers are considered to be of type int. You can always tell what type a variable is by using the function type. So if I say type and I provide the name of a variable, that function will return the type of that variable. So if I say type A, okay, that will, whoops, I indented before I did it, actually. That will tell me that A is an int, okay? As I mentioned, whole numbers are int. So right now the variable A is of type int because its contents are a whole number, and a whole number is an int, okay? Now, a variable can change its type, and does change its type in Python depending on what type of value is stored in it. So if I wrote another statement and changed the value stored in A to be something that looks like this, which is a string, okay, if I change what's stored in A to be the string hello, we'll see if we went on to say type A, okay, that would basically tell me that A is of type string now. Okay, so the variable A has changed types. At one point it was an int, it was because it was storing an int, another time, and then later on it was a string. Okay, and of course we can print variables just like we can print strings. You've done this in your first project, and that would print out the string hello that is now stored in there. Okay, so there's a difference. So there's a difference between an int and a string, and variables have a type associated with them. You kind of want to be aware of this. You don't always have to think about it constantly, but you want to be aware of this because there are certain things that certain operations you can perform on variables of one type that you cannot perform on variables of another type. And very often the actions that you perform behave in a certain way based on the type of the variable, which we're going to see in the example that follows. There's another type in Python, another primary type here, and that's if you have, let's see, I can use another variable. A variable name can pretty much be anything that starts with a letter and it contains letters and digits and underlines. So I don't have to name everything A. So I have another variable here named value, and I'm going to store a value in it, 56.7. Now 56.7 is not an int because it's not a whole number. It's a number with a decimal point. And when you have a number with a decimal point, that is of type float. Okay, so we've seen that variables can be of type int, string, or float. Okay, and now int and float are numerical types, so I can kind of work with all different variables that are numerical together. String is not a numerical type, and so I can't really perform math on a string. So you always want to be aware if a variable is a string. Okay, so these are just the three types, and again, that you'll mostly be using with in this course. And Python does have what a lot of other languages don't have, namely dynamic typing, which just means it changes. The type of a variable changes depending on what's stored in it. As some other languages have what's called static typing, which means a variable can only be one type and be used to store one type of value. Those of you that might have programmed in C++ or Java would know that you have to declare a variable to be a particular type, and it can only be used for that type, and that this is different in Python. Okay, so now let's start off and write a little simple program. Again, I'm in idle, so I can say file, new file, and create myself a file. I'm basically now in the text editor, and I'm creating a file that contain a program. So my program is going to be a really simple program, just to illustrate a couple things. It's going to be a program which adds together two values. Okay, now it's a very good idea when you write a program to start your program off with a comment which tells what the program does. The reason for this is that when you get to the point where you have a lot of different files, a lot of different Python files, and they're all different programs, and you're looking for a particular one, you can just open a file and read the top line, and then you'll know what the program you're looking at does without having to look through all the statements. So it's pretty handy. Okay, and again, a comment is a line or anything basically that starts with a hashtag, and anything that follows a hashtag is ignored by the interpreter. You might remember from chapter 1 reading that when you put a Python program in a file, basically what happens when you run it is that the interpreter executes the statements in the file one at a time. So so the interpreter ignores, when it sees a line or anything basically that starts with a hashtag, it ignores anything after that. Okay, so the interpreter doesn't do anything with this line. This is just for human readers, the reader of the program. And it's called a comment. Okay, so very simply, let's suppose if I wanted to write a program which would add together the values, the numbers 57 and 85. Okay, right now what I've done, okay, so far is I've stored the two values I'm going to add. Okay, so I'm going to put a comment before that indicating what's going on. Okay, now I could write this program without putting these values in variables, but I have reason for doing this, number one, just to give some more examples of variables and variable names. And number two, where I'm going with this a little bit later, I will want to actually have variables for these values. So I put a 57 in the variable val1. I put an 85 in the variable val2. And so now what I want to do is I want to compute the sum. I'm putting a little comment before each section of my program because it just makes my program a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to see what's going on, rather than just having statements within the Python statements within the program. I actually can kind of read the comments and see what's going on. Okay, so this is called commenting your code. So what I want to do now is compute the sum of the two values that I've stored. So I'm going to create another variable, result, and what I'm going to assign to this is the sum of what's in value 1 added together with what's in value 2. Okay, and so I've now that when that statement executes, that sum will be computed, and now I can print out my result. Okay, and here I've used a longer print statement. So I'm printing out the words the sum is, followed by the value that is stored in val1, followed by and the second value that I'm adding, and then the answer. Okay, and now when I run this program, I haven't saved it yet, so it's going to tell me to save it. When you save something, you always want to make sure you remember where you save it. I don't have a special folder for this myself, so I'm just going to store it on the my desktop. So here it stored it and it ran, and the output is the sum of 57 and 85 is 142. Okay, so my program worked just fine there. Okay. And I believe the sum of 57 and 85 is 142, so we're all set. Now, this program's fine, it's correct, it computes the sum of those two numbers, but it's not really that useful because, how often do you want to compute the sum of 57 and 85? Something that would be much more useful would be a program that could compute the sum of any two int values, okay? Now, right now, this program just works with these two numbers. Well, if I want my program to compute the sum of any two int values, and I want the user, the person, in other words, the person running the program, to be able to provide those values, I need to change a couple things. Okay, I want the user to be able to provide the first value to be summed, rather than having a 57 hard-coded in my program. So if I want the user to provide something, I need an input statement, and I'll say, I need it to call the input function, actually, if I want to be technical. And I'll say, please enter the first value to be summed. Okay. Now, this input, when I say input, followed by a string, a bunch of characters in quotes there. When I say input followed by a string in parentheses, what happens is this prompt, these words, this text will be printed to the screen, and then the program will pause and wait for the user to enter something. And when the user enters something, whatever they've entered will be stored in val1 instead of just storing a 57. Okay? The same thing. I'm going to do the same thing for val2. Okay. And again, what's going to happen when this executes is that again, what I put in here, it's called the prompt, because basically it's what's printed to the screen before before input pauses and waits for the user to enter something. So I'll call it the prompt. So this prompt will be printed to the screen and the user can enter something. So now my program's going to run a little bit differently. Remember the way it ran before was there was just this one output statement. Now this time it's going to it's going to prompt the user for 2 values before coming down here and performing the addition. So when I run it, okay, Python's going to tell me, yeah, I've changed it. I need to save it. So I'll say, okay. And now here my program starts to run. And what do we see? Well, what's happening right now is the input has printed at please enter the first value to be summed, and it's sitting there. And so now I need to follow those directions and enter the first value. I can enter whatever I want. I'm going to enter 101. Okay? And when I hit enter at this point, okay, input will grab that text, that 101, okay, and store it in val 1, or in value 1. Okay, so over here, I'm going to hit enter. And now the second statement in my program is running, and this input call is happening, and it's printed out the prompt, and I can enter in another value. Okay, and again, when I do hit enter here, input is done, and it'll grab that 23 and put it in value 2, or val 2, the variable val 2. Okay, now we're going to see something here that's going to seem a little bit odd. So let's look and see what happens. We would expect, now what we expect to happen right now is that 101 and 23, which are the values that are being stored in val 1 and val 2, we expect those to be added together to give us 124, and that we won't expect this program to print out the sum of val 1 and val 2 is, or of 101 and 23 is 124. Okay, now I'm going to hit enter and let's see what happens. Okay, well, it doesn't quite work the way we thought. The program does print out the sum of 101 and 23 is, but now for results, instead of printing out 124, it prints out 10123. Okay, which seems kind of odd because if I add the two numbers together, I don't get 10,123. Okay, now the reason for this has to do with data types. Okay, now remember we saw there were different types. There was an int type, there was a float type, and there was a string type. Okay, now what happens is when I use an input statement like this, input grabs whatever I type. So when I said input, please enter the first value, and I typed 101, 101 is what's stored in val 1, but what is actually stored is the string containing the characters 101. So in other words, right now at this point, if I was able to look inside of val 1, I would see that this string is what is in val 1. Okay, so the result of my input statement up here is the same as having typed this assignment statement. Okay, because basically input returns what the user has typed in the form of a string. So right now val 1 actually contains the string 101, not the int, not the number 101. And I can't do arithmetic with a string. Okay, the same thing down here when I said now enter the second value and I typed a 23. What actually is the case right now is that val 2 actually contains the string 23, not the number 23. Okay, so val 1 and val 2 are string variables. If I was to print out the type of val 1 and val 2, you know, right here it would tell me they were both strings. So what I'm trying to do here is add two strings. Okay, which really isn't what I wanted to do. I want to add two numbers, or I want to do some addition. Okay, so why then do I get this great big long thing here? Well, val1 is a string, val2 is a string right now. And when you use the addition operator between two strings, two variables that are of type string, what happens is Python does not add them because it can't do math on characters. What it does is it concatenates. In other words, it makes one big string out of the two little strings. So val1 is the character's 101, val2 is the character's 23. So result is now this great big string 10123. And that's what it printed out. It printed out that string. Okay? Now, again, this isn't the desired result. What I really wanted val1 to contain the number, the int 101, something that would be comparable to executing a statement like this, right? So what I need to do, right now val1 is the string with the characters 101, so I need to convert the string that's in val1 to a int, or in particular, I really need the integer representation of that string. And that's what this does. So when I say int and I put a variable in there, this variable is expected to contain a string, and the result of this is the integer representation. So rather than the three characters 101, the result of this is the number 101, and I'm going to now assign that back to val1. Okay, so I've replaced what's stored in val1 with the number. Okay, and I'm not taking the time to do it, but actually if I did print out the type of val1 at this point, it would be int. So if I printed out the type of val1 right here, it would be a string. Now val1 has changed to an int, as we saw a little bit earlier. Dynamic typing, the type of a variable can change. So val1 contains the number 101. I want to do the same thing down here. So this val2 needs to be converted to its integer representation, not a string. I can do the same thing. I can say val2 is assigned in val2, just like I did up here with val1. I can do that. Or if I wanted to be save a little bit of time, I can actually do it all at once. I can say int and put basically what I'm doing here is I'm taking what was returned or what was provided by input, the text that was provided by input, I'm taking that and right away giving that to int to provide the numerical representation. Okay, so I could have done it. I could have handled the conversion of val2 in the same way that I did val1. I could have done that, but I'm just showing you two different ways of doing the exact same thing. So at this point, val2 and val1 are both ints. Okay, so they're both numbers. So now when I add them together, I should get the correct result. And let's see. Okay, and again, the advantage of having that input statement is I can add any two numbers that I want. And now I have now my program actually performs correct addition. Okay, so that was a nice little example again of you've seen a comment, you've seen variables changing types, you've seen variable type conversion when necessary, and a nicer output statement there. Usually when you print something, even though you can just print a variable, I could have just printed result. I could have just said print result here when I was printing the answer, but it's always a good idea to accompany any result, any answer, any number that you're printing, anything that you're printing with some text explaining what it is so that the output of your program is clearer. Okay, so this should help you out with this week's project.